reading from the book of Wisdom. Hear, O kings, and understand. Learn, you magistrates of the earth's expanse. Hearken, you who are in power over the multitude, and lord it over throngs of peoples. Because authority was given you by the Lord, and sovereignty by the Most High, who shall probe your works and scrutinize your counsels. Because, though you were ministers of his kingdom, you judged not rightly, and did not keep the law, nor walk according to the will of God. Terribly and swiftly shall he come against you, because judgment is stern for the exalted. For the lowly may be pardoned out of mercy, but the mighty shall be mightily put to the test. For the Lord of all shows no partiality, nor does he fear greatness, because he himself made the great as well as the small, and he provides for all alike. But for those in power, a rigorous scrutiny impends. To you, therefore, O princes, are my words addressed, that you may learn wisdom and that you may not sin. For those who keep the holy precepts, hallowed shall be found holy, and those learned in them will have ready a response. Desire therefore my words, long for them, and you shall be instructed. Verbum Domini. Rise up, O God, bring judgment to the earth.
Rise up, O God, bring judgment to the earth.
Defend the lowly and the fatherless. Render justice to the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the lowly and the poor. From the hand of the wicked, deliver them.
Rise up, O God, bring judgment to the earth.
I said, you are gods, all of you sons of the Most High. Yet like men you shall die, and fall like any prince.
Rise up, O God, bring judgment to the earth.
In all circumstances give thanks, for this is the will of God for you in Christ Jesus. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Lectio Sancti Evangelii secundum Lucam.
Gloria tibi, Domine.
As Jesus continued his journey to Jerusalem, he traveled through Samaria and Galilee. As he was entering a village, 10 lepers met him. They stood at a distance from him and raised their voice, saying, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. And when he saw them, he said, Go show yourselves to the priest. As they were going, they were cleansed. And one of them, realizing he had been healed, returned, glorifying God in a loud voice. And he fell at the feet of Jesus and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Jesus said in reply, 10 were cleansed, were they not? Where are the other 9? Has none but this foreigner returned to give thanks to God? Then he said to him, Stand up and go. Your faith has saved you. Verbum Domini.
Laus tibi Christe.
Today, in the first reading from the book of Wisdom, we see this warning to rulers. Hear, O kings, and understand, magistrates, hearken, you are in power, and lord it over the throngs of people. He goes on to say that, God will scrutinize your work. Did you keep the law? Did you walk according to the will of God? Learn wisdom that you may not sin. So it's an exhortation to these rulers to rule rightly, in accordance, we say, to the natural law, to right reason, to the law of God that binds all men, believer, non-believer alike. It has a line in here that always, ever since seminary, it's always kind of, even before seminary, I remember reading it, and it always kind of questioned what it means. It says, because authority was given you by the Lord. Romans 13 puts it even stronger, saying that all authority is from God. And that we know when we obey right authority, just authority, there's a great human flourishing. We see that in the family. If there's an orderly family life, a school life, community life, an orderly life in society, there's a human flourishing. We go to a great city and you see men, women being able to come together, to work together, in harmony, more or less. They can achieve great things, big buildings and great building projects. You could have great efforts of accomplishment, achievement. In this country, we think of the 60s and landing on the moon. That was a huge communal effort that needed to be directed, that everybody could come together and give their talents and service and build on the service of one another and improve the overall effect. There's a multiplier effect. Cities, I think, can be a beautiful image of this, and we know there's all kinds of struggles in cities and fallenness and crime and poverty. There's lots of images of human frailty, but there's also glimpses of what's possible. Even the arts, coming together to produce great art is possible in social, communal, directed towards a good. We are social by nature. We're social beings. We gather in groups. We aid one another. We're perfected, not, in isolation. There might be special calls, we have in the church, people to be hermits, whatever, but generally, we're perfected coming together. We see that on a practical level all the time. You get married, you have kids, it takes the edges off. You got to live together. But it's a beautiful thing to see a family persevere with one another in love is no small achievement, accomplishment today. And it's a great thing. It's a source of peace. It's an oasis of love and peace in our culture today. So this is the thing that always kind of questions that authority comes from God. And what he's talking about is, because we all know there's despots and there's tyrants and there's been horrible abuse. The past century had the most staggering abuses against human dignity the world has ever seen. So many people killed, murdered, starvation, war. We see abuse of that. But this authority as such, God would never intend like a tyrant to be in power, but authority as such, comes from God. And that the church teaches, we have the freedom to choose rulers and have different types of government. Today we have democracy, and God can work through that. We elect leaders, officials to govern us, to rule us in a sense, our bodies to have this authority, and that's all legitimate. And when it's in working well in harmony and peace, we see a human flourishing. So we have a social nature that needs to be directed to a common good, Authority gives effective direction and unity of purpose, that we can achieve something greater as a whole than we can as individuals. So we say the church teaches that authority has its source in human nature, and consequently has God for its authority, that because he's created that human nature and made it with, to be in accordance with right reason, we say that God is the ultimate source of that authority. So this authority, as I mentioned, must be exercised. People must be governed in accordance with right reason, that its binding force is from the moral order, which in turn, that moral order has its origin and end in God. Because we say this natural law that a just government is to uphold is rooted in the eternal law of God, that natural law, that we participate in the eternal law, the lawgiver, God, we participate by use of reason. And I think this is the biggest of questions today, is that we need to come to an understanding of that natural law that binds all men, not just Catholics, not just believers, not just Christians. Whether you're a believer or not, because we have this human nature made by God that flourishes in a moral order, we have to have a trust, we have to have a knowledge of the natural law. And the problem today is we can't agree on what that law says. We think about the life issues. We think about questions of the definition of marriage. We think about immigration. We think about war. That there's moral principles to guide us in this that we need to live in accordance with. And as believers, though, we do have a great assurance. We have a great teacher in the church. Our faith does give us direction. It does teach this natural law that we can know with certainty through the church's teaching. Without the church teaching, we can get it wrong. We have a fallen human intellect. We can have misunderstandings. It can be clouded by self-interest or selfishness. We can interpret it in a way that's self-serving. So our faith greatly helps us in this. So we can say that the authority that leaders have is a sharing in the authority of God himself, because it's serving a moral order that God has established. And without this authority in our society, we have chaos. And that's a scary thing we see today, especially, in America. We see a growing chaotic movement, political movements, that just want to disrupt any kind of order. And the devil likes chaos. Sin divides. Sin creates chaos that divests authority. It likes that chaos because it can flourish. It can do whatever it wants. It's not bound by any moral teaching or moral law. But we do always have to measure that authority in our society, that is it just or unjust. In Acts 5, we see Paul saying it's right to, we see in Acts that the apostle saying it is right to obey God rather than men. That when push comes to shove, that authority needs to, and this is what wisdom is saying today, needs to act in accordance with the natural law. And if it doesn't, we have no duty to respect it or to obey it. So it always needs to be purified. We're always working for a just political, just social order that we as citizens, have to be active in pursuing. Because, human original sin, personal sin, is always this force to create chaos and to separate and divide. So these are important principles, that we live by as a society. And we need to, especially, and I'll close with just to pray for our political leaders, that they need our prayers as good citizens, faithful to God. We need to be praying them, obtaining grace for them in the sense that they can govern us rightly.